Good evening, and welcome to TMI Live number 59, Umi Ii. This is kind of crazy. Yesterday, Understanding Media Intensive Part 2 went live on the grayarea.org website. And so it is officially happening, and this might not sound crazy to anybody else, but for me it is. This is part 2. Part 1, Understanding Media Intensive. The story goes that I suggested on Twitter that in order to do a book like Understanding Media, the Extensions of Man, Marshall McLuhan, 1964, Justice, you couldn't just cover it in one class. And a lot of university communication courses, media courses, they have to survey a lot of books, Understanding Media being one of them. So they spend, half a class on it or something, maybe a full class. Anyway, it was my suggestion that that was ridiculous. And in order to do a book like this justice, you had to spend at least a semester on it. And somebody called me on that and said, well, you should do that. To which I said, okay, sure. If 5 people are interested, I'll write an outline. And if 10 people actually sign up, I'll run the course. So several people expressed their interest, and I wrote an outline. Amazingly, Barry Through from Gray Area reached out and said, hey, we'd love to do this with you. So we made it live, and I had somewhere around 40 people actually took the class. Some of those were scholarships of one type or another, but in any case, it wildly exceeded my expectations in terms of turnout. Hey, friends. And at the end of it, the idea behind, actually backing up a little bit, in UMI Understanding Media Intensive, I only proposed to cover part 1 of the book, and that's in this edition, just up to my finger here, 2 introductions by Marshall McLuhan and the first 7 chapters. The book is divided into 2 parts, part 1 and part 2, and according to the tradition of my father and grandfather, the tradition I was brought up in, part 1, the 7 chapters, are tools for understanding media, these extensions of humans. And part 2, the lion's share of the book, another 28 or so chapters, 26, is it 26 letters of the alphabet? I think so. Part 2 is a closer look at specific technologies using the sort of tools from part 1 and other things. I expected to stop UMI there and not go any further because for me, I'm interested in the practical things, teaching, tools for understanding media today. And that's why this book is enduring, is because these things laid out in part 1 are timeless. They're as useful today as they were when they were developed in actually, the late 50s. This is TMI Live 59, and in 1959, Marshall McLuhan was hard at work coming up with the material that will be published in this book 5 years later. But my students, God bless them, were really vocal about me continuing. So I kind of did the same thing and said I'd give it a shot, and if people signed up, I'd do it. So here we are. I've divided part 2 into 2 additional courses. So all told, there's going to be 3 parts to teaching this book. And I'm launching part 2 now. It went live last night. In part 2, we're going to start where we left off, chapter 8, which is the spoken word flower of evil, ? And we'll finish off on chapter 20, the photograph, the Brothel-without-Walls. That already is more material than in the first part, but actually in the first part I spent the first 2 or maybe even 3 classes. I did a lot of work to provide people with a background on who Marshall McLuhan was and how he came to develop this material. And I'm going to actually make those introductory classes available for people who sign up for UMI 2, who didn't take the first part but want to jump in now. And I'm really, really excited to be doing this again. I really didn't think I would be going further in this book, but I'm thrilled. The way I ran it was, I kind of followed in Marshall and my father's footsteps and how they interacted with texts. And I went through this with my pencil, as you can see, underlining and making notes in the margins. What I was trying to do was take my basically lifetime of experience growing up around this stuff and pulling out all the anecdotes I could. Hey, Alfonso. Hey, Sam. Pulling out all the anecdotes I can remember, making, bringing all the things I can to bear on the text. My kind of thesis or my assumption or the way I treat this text is like a poem. So what I did was I basically read along and stopped to pull out bits and pieces and explain things and elucidate them. Another thing I leaned on very heavily was the Brewer's Dictionary of Phrase and Fable, because Marshall makes so many different references to this, that, and the other thing. Brewer's Dictionary comes in handy chasing down those references, and it was really interesting to see where some of those references lead. Like one of my favorites was Marshall, somewhere in the first part, makes a reference to edible spaceships. And if you look up edible spaceships, there actually was an attempt in early space flight to create components for spaceships that would be edible, so that the astronauts fly out and on the way back they could actually eat parts of their ship, so that for efficiency's sake. And there were just lots of weird digressions that came along and little side avenues, that were totally unexpected, at least from my part, and it was a lot of fun. So I'm looking very much forward to doing this again. I've already got some people signed up from what I could see. If you're interested, go to grayarea.org, and there's a sign up information there, or go to the McLuhaninstitute.com and all the info is there. One thing I will note is I'm really pleased. Gray Area is a great organization, and together we're offering a diversity scholarship, as it's called. And that's open for people who are facing circumstances that would prevent them joining a class like this, be that financial or otherwise circumstances. There are a lot of barriers in education and in technology, and I believe in doing everything possible to reduce those barriers. So if that circumstance describes you, make sure you go down to the bottom of the Gray Area page to find that entry form. Rain Alfonso says edible spaceships, right? Did you have a favorite moment? There's a couple people here in the chat that were actually on the course. Anyway, I'm really interested. There's some pretty cool things that will be part of it. The other thing is that I'll be leading the course from here, from the headquarters in the McLuhan Institute. Thanks to internet upgrades, I now have a fast enough connection to be able to do that kind of thing. So I used to rent an office space in a nearby town and have to lug books back and forth from here. Every week, every class, I'd have half a dozen to a dozen books from this library that were referenced in this book that I would bring. So when Marshall quotes from a book, I'd actually pull the book. And it was really interesting to read the circumstances around that quote, and it is kind of an amazing thing. So I'm really looking forward to jumping into this journey again, and I hope as many of you as can will join. My able assistant, Stephen, is on the disabled list at the moment, but he's helping me edit down UMI 1, so I'll hopefully have that whole suite, it ended up like something crazy, like 36 hours of me talking about the first part of this book. So we're going to bring that down to a more manageable number, and you'll be able to, purchase that and get in on the whole course eventually. So thanks for listening to me talk about this thing I'm really excited to do. Sign up, y'all. Alfonso says, yeah, please do, because I want to be able to do this again. Part 3. So part 3, what we're going to do, backing up, it's starting March 20th. It's going to run to, I think the last class is June 5th. Then we're going to take a couple months off in the summer for sanity and to rest our brains. And we'll come back, I think, in September, October, November, to do the remaining chapters. Wow, people are throwing, it's a cascade of hug emojis. Yeah. I know that's all you, Alfonso, but thanks. I love you, man. So thanks, everybody. I hope you can join us for Understanding Media Intensive Part 2, Return of the Mac, McLuhan. Terrible joke. And we'll see you again. Thanks for watching. TheMcLuhanInstitute.com, grayarea.org. Cheers. Good night.